Welcome to IPR Radio. I'm Sanjay Mukherjee. In today's episode, we speak to Dr. Sudipto Haldar, Research Director, Aggregate Research and Advisory Private Limited, on fermentation of unconventional raw materials, the future feeding strategy. Having started his career with academics, Dr. Haldar now runs the research and development wing of Aggregate Research and Advisory Private Limited, an organization which provides research and nutritional consultancy to its partners worldwide. After obtaining his bachelor's degree in veterinary science, Dr. Haldar did his post-graduation from the National Dairy Research Institute, Karnal, and then obtained his PhD in animal nutrition. Post this, he entered into teaching and research in animal nutrition at the West Bengal University of Animal and Fishery Sciences, Kolkata. In his present role as Research Director, Aggregate Research and Advisory Private Limited, Dr. Haldar liaises with service seekers who want to test the efficacy of their products under the typical tropical climatic conditions. In this way, Dr. Haldar links Aggregate Research and Advisory Private Limited with the global R&D centers of organizations which are engaged with poultry production. Apart from the research and development works that he does, Dr. Haldar is engaged in providing nutritional support to clients spread over parts of India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. After the break.
In the orchestra of life, each creature plays a part. At Sapience, we see the web of life, where the health of animals reverberates through ecosystems and societies. With innovative technologies, we're redefining the future of agribusiness, sustainably enhancing productivity and profitability. We don't just dream of a better future, we make it. Food safety, quality, and security. These aren't just words, they're our mission. We're Sapience, and we're committed to healthier animals because we believe in healthier living. Be a part of our melody, and together, let's compose a better world. For more information about our products and solutions, log into sapienceagri.com.
Good morning, Dr. Haldar, and welcome to IPR Radio.
Good morning, Mr. Mukherjee.
Nice to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
Despite several supply chain disruptions, the demand for animal protein has been growing consistently, driven by the association of rich protein food or protein-rich food with wellness, health, and immunity. However, volatility in the pricing of several raw materials has forced the animal feed industry to explore the usage of alternative raw materials to produce quality feed.
Exactly.
However, these unconventional raw materials, as they're called, often pose challenges to performance issues. This can be mitigated through the use of fermentation technology, thus turning waste into treasure. So as we go into this discussion, Dr. Haldar, I'd like to ask you a few key questions to explain this concept to us. See, nowadays we hear a lot about the use of unconventional raw materials for animal feed. Can you elucidate on what are considered unconventional raw materials and how do they differ from the so-called traditional raw materials?
Okay, fine. Well, Mr. Mukherjee, as you can see from the terminology itself, that unconventional. So common people, this unconventional means the raw materials with which the producers are not really familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
That means they are available, but not to that extent. They are not amply available.
Right.
So they are available sporadically. They are available in certain pockets of a country or in a region. And as a result of these raw materials cannot be termed as a widespread usable raw materials. And apart from that, these raw materials are having some own restrictions because of the presence of certain anti-nutritional factors, or maybe some toxins, or maybe some other materials which are not really favorable for the growth of the animals. So considering all these things, there are certain raw materials which may be of protein in nature or maybe of energy source, which can be used, but with some limited applications. These raw materials are termed as the unconventional raw materials. If I give you some examples, for example, copra meal, which is available to a great extent in the coastal areas of India, but you cannot get the copra meal in the northern part of India. So this copra meal will be considered as an unconventional raw material. It can be used in dairy cattle, it can be used in poultry, but to a limited extent, and not everywhere in the Indian subcontinent. So this is
Mhm.
one example of
Mhm.
copramil, unconventional feed.
Right, right. So, what are the main challenges associated with the use of these unconventional raw materials? Why are they not mainstream, so to speak?
Exactly. This is a very pertinent question. In fact, you know that one of the challenges, as I have told you just now, that these are not available amply, and you
Mhm.
cannot say that all the unconventional raw materials will be available all over the country, and to a constant extent, so that I can plan as a producer of
Right.
poultry feed or dairy feed that I can include this particular raw material throughout the year up to this extent. Apart from these, the main challenge with this unconventional raw material is related to the presence of certain anti-nutritional factors. The anti-nutritional factors, for example, guar meal. This is available widespread in the
Right.
western part of the country, like in Rajasthan, in some parts of Gujarat, and maybe in some parts of Haryana. And it's a fantastic source of protein. Can you think of a protein meal which contains more than 50% of protein consistently? But the main problem is that this guar meal, it contains a huge quantity of galactomannan, which is a gum-like substance.
Yes. Hmm.
So if this gum is present, this gum cannot be digested by the monogastric animals. So this is something which will hinder the use of guar meal as a source of protein in any monogastric diet. We cannot use it. In the same way, if you consider, for example, say bran, any bran like de-oiled rice bran or wheat bran, these bran-like substances they contain some trapped nutrients. They contain huge
Hmm.
quantity of fiber, crude fiber. Not only crude fiber, there are a lot of other anti-nutritional factors which bind the carbohydrate part within this bran fraction in such a way that this bran cannot be digested by the monogastric animals. So
Okay.
whatever nutrient is present over there, they cannot be digested. They will remain trapped. They will remain unutilized by the animals. As a result, these raw materials cannot be used to a great extent in any animal feeding program unless some treatments are given to these raw materials to make the nutrients available for digestion in the animal system.
Right, right. So another concept we hear of nowadays in its greening ground is fermented raw materials. So what are fermented raw materials and what are its applications?
Okay. This fermentation actually if you think about this fermentation technology, the fermentation means you are simply exposing any substance, any biological substance rather, uh, to some microorganisms. The microorganisms, it may be fungus, it may be bacteria, it may be both. Now when the biological substance is exposed to these microorganisms, so the microorganisms use this biological material as their substrate to grow. So they grow on these biological materials, they derive the nutrients from there, and they release some metabolites, half digested materials, into the medium where they grow. So this is the basic fermentation technology in a very, I can say that in a very nutshell, or you can say in a very easier terminology. Now, considering this fermentation of the raw materials, actually it comes from the fermentation of soybean meal. Soybean meal, despite being a very conventional raw material, was the first conventional, or I can say that the protein meal, which was subjected to fermentation. The
Hmm.
reason is the fermentation makes the raw material easily digestible. Now,
Right.
if I share a screen here, if you allow me, then I can make the things more
Please, please, please.
plain. Okay. So this is
Could you?
actually
Yeah.
a scheme of how fermentation is done with soybean meal. This yellow background, this actually represents a single soybean particle.
Mhm.
This soybean meal is fermented with a fungus as per genus Niger. This fungus actually they grow into the particle of the soybean meal. The hyphae grow inside, just like this. So a tree-like structure develops inside the particle of soybean meal, and this from this hyphae, the fungus secretes some enzymes, mainly the
Mhm.
proteolytic enzymes. These
Right.
proteolytic enzymes, what actually they do? they digest, they degrade the protein which is present inside this soybean meal particle. So finally, this entire material becomes digested, or you can say that half digested. If this entire material is now digested with a secondary bacteria, for example, Bacillus subtilis, so these Bacillus subtilis, they secrete further proteolytic enzymes. So the proteolytic enzymes secreted by Aspergillus niger and the proteolytic enzymes secreted by a secondary bacteria like Bacillus subtilis, both of them work together and they make the soybean meal particle digested, half digested. The same concept can be applied for other raw materials as well, where a particular species of fungus or a particular species of bacteria should be identified. The raw material needs to be fermented in presence of this bacteria or the fungus, and the entire process will make the material half digested. And once this half digested material is included in the dietary regimen of any animal, it is expected that the digestion process will proceed in a much better way. In a much better way, in the way because the material which was otherwise undigested to a great extent has now become undigested material. So naturally, you can expect that the animals will be able to extract more amount of nutrients from this fermented raw material.
Right. Right. So, what have been or what are the key drivers behind the exploration of fermentation of unconventional raw materials today? What is driving this?
Yeah. See, one of the explanations that you have already given, that the prices of the raw materials are increasing every day. Actually, there is a rise in the prices of the raw materials, and especially the protein meals are uh, the main problem, which is actually restricting the exploitation of the full genetic potential of our livestock. That is
Right.
true. We have to accept the fact. Now, the protein meals are always costly. And if the protein meals are costly, then we need to find out something which will be cheaper, but at the same time, it should provide the same level of nutrition as the conventional raw materials provide to our animals. Now,
True.
out of the conventional raw materials, probably there is no other available option but for soybean meal, because this is most consistent in nature. It's available around the year. It's available throughout the world. And to be honest, apart from soybean meal, there is no other protein meal which can really support the growth of the fast growing animal species nowadays, especially the monogastric animals, the poultry as well as the
Mm.
swine. The question comes that if this is the case, then what will happen if soybean meal becomes not available, becomes unavailable? Then what will happen? We don't know. We don't have any answer. So this is the main driving force, probably, that is actually forcing everybody to find out an alternative to the soybean meal. And this is the main driving force. This is the main driving force, I must say. And there is another very important driving force here, which probably we, from the Indian perspective, we do not take care of, but globally it is very important. The carbon footprint. This is
Right.
extremely
Right.
important. For soybean, the soybean pulp plantation, the carbon footprint is extremely high, especially if you consider the facts of when soybean is harvested in southern part of America, then how much carbon footprint it yields. It's a huge amount. So the only alternative by which this soybean carbon footprint can be reduced is just to convert this soybean meal into a concentrated protein.
Right.
So this can be exported to some other meals as well. Instead of soybean meal, definitely some other meals which are rich in protein, which can provide some good quantity of nutrients to the animals. They can be converted to some easily digestible and easily available meals for the animals, and this should be the main another driving force for this fermentation technology.
Right. It's interesting you should say that, because I was going to ask you uh, about the sustainability. In terms of sustainability, how does fermentation of unconventional raw materials compared to uh, traditional raw materials from the sustainability angle? So that's where the carbon footprint is what you're talking about.
Yes. This is very important because sustainability is the major issue. You know that the
Hmm.
sustainability, if any procedure or any process is developed and it doesn't appear to be sustainable, then the future of this particular procedure becomes questionable. Now, so far I understand regarding the sustainability of productivity of animals with the help of these fermented raw
Mm-hmm.
materials, it is enormous. It should be enormous, to be honest. That if you compare the conventional protein mills, for example, our discussion will be mainly concentrated around the protein mills because the protein mills are
Absolutely.
very that inevitable, you have to use it, and at the same time they are costly and there is no
Mm.
such replacement. So our discussion will be mainly focused on the protein mills. Now the point is that these protein mills, if you consider soybean meal as a standard, and if you consider any other unconventional raw material, take the example of say cottonseed meal, you take the example of maybe guar meal, or any animal protein sources like slaughterhouse byproducts. So if you consider the protein content of these unconventional, so-called unconventional meals with soybean meal, which is a standard, they're comparable, absolutely comparable. Consider the amino acid composition, excellent amino acid composition. In some cases, you may even find some amino acid densities are quite higher than that present in soybean meal. And I'm talking about the high protein variant of the soybean meal, 48% or 50% soybean meal. So if this is the case, the main problem is that these nutrients which are present in these unconventional, so-called unconventional raw materials, can we use them somehow? This is the main question. Unfortunately, the answer is mostly negative. The
Mm-hmm.
animals cannot digest because of the presence of number of anti-nutritional factors. Now,
Right.
here we need to remember one point, that if you consider the anti-nutritional factors, they are present in soybean meal as well. It's not that the soybean meal is completely pure raw material. It also contains number of anti-nutritional factors. But how we have dealt with the situation, we have simply treated it in such a way that all
Right.
the nutritional factors are now nullified, they're
Right.
neutralized. So we can do the same with these unconventional raw materials. Think
Right.
about cottonseed meal. It contains gossypol. It's a it's an anti-nutritional factor, we know. But now the cottonseed meal is degossypolized. So this gossypol doesn't pose any problem to the animals when it is fed to the monogastric animals. Take the example of, say, canola meal or rapeseed meal. It contains that glucosinolates. Now, there are variants which doesn't contain any glucosinolate, the canola meal, double zero variant. So we have already handled this situation. Now, this fermentation technology, that will be one step ahead. Here we are targeting those anti-nutritional factors which are actually trapping the nutrients which are already present there
Mm-hmm.
and converting the same material to an easily digestible material for the monogastric animal. If we consider the monogastric or compare the monogastric animals with a ruminant species, a cow, you can understand very easily. We can feed any material to a cow. Why? Because it contains a fermentation bag, the rumen. So there, all the unconventional raw materials are converted to a simply digested, half digested material. So this
Right.
is the same thing what we are going to do here with the help of this fermentation technology. We are fermenting the material outside the system, converting it to half digested material, and now feeding them to the monogastric animals and expecting some better results.
We'll be back after a short commercial break.
That is a wake up call against the growing shadow of antibiotic resistance over our poultry, our health, and our world. To fight this menace, Excelsior, a natural antibiotic free performance enhancer, marshals an army of bacteriophages, each engineered by evolution to engage a specific bacterial adversary. Excelsior uses a cocktail of bacteriophages that protects your flock against various strains of Salmonella, E. coli, Clostridium perfringens, and Staphylococcus aureus. Excelsior is more than a product. It's our shield against antimicrobial resistance. It's our stand for a safer, healthier future. For more information about our products and solutions, log into sapiensagri.com.
So, are there, any regulatory or safety concerns regarding the use of these so-called unconventional raw materials? And because we are ultimately they're entering the food chain of humans as well. So, are there any concerns there? Like for example, you spoke about cottonseed meal, and we know the cotton in this country is genetically modified cotton that we're using here.
Yeah,
So does that, or have any impact from a regulatory perspective?
I understand your question. So far, I know that there should not be any, there is no regulatory restrictions regarding the use of the cottonseed, I mean, these fermented raw materials, because there are certain organizations which are converting some protein meals into these fermented protein meals. Uh, and these fermented protein meals are used in European countries, in some parts of South Asia, without any
Hmm.
regulatory hassle, to be honest. Now,
Right.
so far as human safety is concerned, there are certain points. Definitely, there are
Hmm.
certain points.
Okay.
For example,
Yeah.
you are fermenting. Here, we are planning to ferment the material. So the fermentation actually needs to be a controlled one.
Hmm.
The fermentation end product will be a semi-solid or viscous material that needs to be dried up, that must be checked for any other chemicals or mycotoxins which may be present as residue. Because if the material is not properly dried, if the material is not properly, you can say, the dehumidified, then there is a high possibility that it will attract growth of molds and fungus.
Right.
If this is so, in that case, you can expect that some abnormally high development of mycotoxins over there. And if mycotoxins are present and if it goes uncontrolled into the animal feed, then there is a possibility that that will be present as a residue in the meat and the eggs, and ultimately it may impact human health. So
Hmm.
this possibility is there, of course.
Right. 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 So, how do you envision the scalability of using fermentation processes using unconventional raw materials to meet at the global food demand? Because that's what we're all working towards.
Yeah, this scalability, this scalability should be our challenge. Should be a challenge in what sense? You know that there are certain points which needs to be kept in mind when the fermentation of a raw material is done and is converted to raw material which will be ultimately included in the final ration of animals, replacing the conventional protein meals like soybean meal. Now, the fermentation should be guided in such a way that it ferments most of the protein up to the level of small peptides. Remember, this should be converted to the level of peptides. The fermentation must not continue to the level of producing individual amino acids or very small peptide molecules, for example, these dipeptides or tripeptide. It should be something like an oligopeptide.
Hmm.
Now, the size of the fermented end product is very important because you know that the protein molecules which are present in any protein meal, even in soybean meal, is quite bigger, more than 10,000 Daltons or something like that. The point is, soybean meal can be easily digested because its digestibility is high, inherent digestibility is high. But for the unconventional protein meals, the digestibility is low. So these bigger molecules cannot be digested by the animals. The objective of the fermentation will be to reduce the particle size below 10,000 Daltons, but it should be stopped somewhere before the fermentation produces very small peptides and individual amino acids. Because if the fermentation continues to that extent, in that case, the whole material will be extremely sticky, it will be unpalatable, it cannot be dried up properly, and so it will be difficult to handle. So, this is one of the reasons that the scalability of this entire operation may be a bit problematic. There is another point actually. For example, say you need 300 metric tons of a fermented protein meal every month. So this means you should produce at least 10 metric tons of this material every day. Now,
Hmm.
there will be a considerable loss of dry matter during the process of fermentation. Now, we are not yet very much sure about what is the extent of dry matter loss. This needs to be standardized. But you can expect that at least twice the amount of the end product that should be fed to the system to produce, say, X quantity of the end product. So if I need, say, 10 tons of fermented product, I must feed the system with at least 20 to 30 tons of raw material to the system. Now, once the process starts, then definitely it will continue. It will continue and will produce the end product in a continuous manner. But how much this is scalable, it is still a bit questionable, because
Right.
considering all these constraints of the size, of the palatability issues. So a lot of standardization is required, especially with regard to the unconventional ones. With regard to soybean meal, the process has been standardized, but it is
Mhm.
not yet standardized so far as the unconventional raw materials are concerned.
So basically, for commercialization, that is an important angle, right?
Exactly. The
Mm.
commercialization is an
Mm.
important angle.
Mm. Right, right. So, Dr. Haldar, what are the implications of using fermented unconventional raw materials on animal health and welfare? Because that's something that's also very important to kind of understand.
Okay. See, if the raw material which is fermented, processed properly, dried up properly, stored properly, and it appears to be free from any residual chemicals, residual toxins, then this should be absolutely free, and this absolutely okay for animal consumption. There should not be any problem. You just take the example of, say, DDGS, which is very common
Mm.
in case of poultry or in case of that
Right.
swine. The main question is that so far the DDGS is properly dried. It doesn't contain any chemical toxin. It doesn't contain any residual mycotoxin or fungus. Absolutely fine. But if somehow it contains some chemical toxins, for example, we have used, say, corn as a substrate, and the corn contains a huge quantity of, the pesticide, and that pesticide comes into the DDGS
Right.
without our notice. So it will be there in the DDGS, and it will create a huge
Mm.
problem for the animal. So that
Sure.
part needs
Sure.
to be taken care of, and we have to
Right.
ensure that
Right.
whatever material is going into the fermentation process,
Mm. Mhm.
that is checked properly and doesn't contain any residual toxin. So
Right.
far this is taken care of. There should not be any problem. Absolutely fine.
Okay, that's wonderful to hear. Dr. Halda, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, and thank you for taking time out,
Thank you very
to
much.
be with us and for this wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much.
To be notified of upcoming podcasts, like and subscribe our YouTube channel at IPR Radio today.